Rebbe, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Before we start today's thought of the week, we'll begin with a pasuk in Tillim, and this pasuk in Tillim, in particular, we are having in mind the victims of the building collapse in Miami. Hashem, please have Rachmanis and make miracles, and no one should be hurt, and everyone should be alive. We're saying the first pasuk of the Rebbe's kapitel, Shir HaMayles El Adonai Batzarosoli Korosi Vayaneini, which means I call out to Hashem in a time of distress and crisis and problems and troubles, and he answered me. And obviously it means he answered me with the salvation, with the help, etc. So too, it should be taken from Yad Mamish for everyone that's there. This week, today is Erev Parshas Balak. And this past week was Beis Gimel Tammuz, the Chag Agul of the Frierdiker Rebbe, who is one of the greatest superheroes of Jewish history, a symbol of self-sacrifice, a giant of fortitude, courage, etc., who still inspires to this very day, of course. So we'll talk about the connection of the Chag HaGeula of Beis Gimel Tammuz to this week's Parsha, and in general, in this week's Parsha, we have the answer to two very, very general questions. We've spoken about this before, and as a matter of fact, I would say it's one of my favorite subjects in Judaism, in life, and that is the secret of Jewish survival. As we've mentioned, the famous letter of Mark Twain, what is the secret of their immortality? So that's one question. Goes against all the laws of nature. And the second question is actually, what gave the Jewish people strength to withstand all of the oppression, all of the persecutions throughout history? Every single generation there's been some evil regime or wicked people, Rishoyim, that tried to wipe us out, annihilate us, etc. And still the Jew has stood strong and firm as ever to face up to it, etc. And so we come to this week's Parsha, which is a prime example. We have Balak and Bilam, two evil characters that are plotting our downfall. And what happens in the Parsha? As we know that Hashem makes a miracle, that, we're cutting a long story short, that Bilam, who was meant to be an origin of harm and destruction for us, turns out to be a source of blessings. Hashem makes it that he transforms the curses into blessings. And actually we have the most grand, magnificent, so to speak, psukim in this week's Parsha, both concerning the Jewish nation, and we also know that there are many, many psukim in this week's Parsha that are referring to the Messianic times when Mashiach will come, etc. So let's talk about one of these psukim, which sheds light on this very, very epic question of Jewish survival. And that pasuk is one of my favorite psukim in the Torah, where Bilam says, Ki mereish tzurim erenu, umigvois ashurenu, hen levodod yishkoin, uvagoyim lo yischashov. So Rashi says that mereish tzurim erenu, I see the Jews from their origin, rock-like, and this refers to the Avos and the Imois. And then he says, the Jews are a nation that will dwell in solitude. And according to the Pashto Pshat, then the pasuk continues, Uvagoyim lo yischashav, and not be reckoned among the nations. Why is that a blessing, that will be in solitude? Because the other nations will be judged, and there will be major punishments, and not all nations will survive. But the Jews will not be judged in such a way, and therefore we will not be counted amongst the other nations. That's the Pashut Pshat in the Pasuk, according to Rashi. So, the way I always learned Pshat, by the way, interesting what the Gemara says over here, that from the words of Bilam, on the second part of the Pasuk, where he says the Jews will dwell in solitude, we see what he really intended to say, which this turned out to be the opposite, was that the Jews should assimilate. We should become like everybody else. There will be no distinction between Jew and non-Jew, because there won't be any more Jews. All the Jews will have become assimilated. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. So that was going to be his curse. So what did Hashem say? What did it turn out to be? What did Hashem make Bilam say? That we'll be a nation that will dwell in solitude. We'll always be distinguished. We'll always be outstanding, as we'll explain. What the real depth of the meaning of these words is according to Kabbalah and Chassidus. Now, I always learn Pshat, that the first part of the Pasuk is talking about, getting back to the question of where we get our strength from, the first part of the Pasuk is talking about our history. So we come from the Avos. And as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that from the Avos we inherited, it became implanted in every single Jew, this power of self-sacrifice, of selflessness, of being able to withstand whatever challenges come our way and stick to our principles and our values and our loyalty to Hashem. And it doesn't only refer to the Avos, it refers to all of the Tzaddikim, the history of Purim, the story of Chanukah, and with the Lubavitcher Rebbeim. And if we talk about the previous Rebbe, his father, when he was 18 years old, made a bond with him that he's going to go on Mesiras Nefesh, no matter what, for Judaism. So throughout history, every single story is connected to Mesiras Nefesh. The history of the Jewish nation always is about this idea of being loyal to Hashem no matter what, and sticking to what we believe is the truth. So that's the first part of the Pasuk, which says, we were brought up, our mother's milk was about self-sacrifice, Mesiras Nefesh. And the second part of the Pasuk, I always learn Pshat, as we'll soon explain. It's talking about the nature of the Jew, the essence. We are a nation apart. Every one of us is apart. Achelik elika mimal mamish, higher than the world, as we'll soon see. But then I opened up a Balaturim, and I see the way he learns Pshat, even in the first part of the Pasuk, and it inspires me to no end. One of the things he says on the words, Kimereish tzurim arenu, the Balaturim says, Ani roye shenivru koidim shenivra ha'olam v'hatzurim. It doesn't mean that the Jews are standing atop of the rocks and the cliffs, who are our forefathers. It means we're standing before the world and the cliffs. That's what it means. Kimereish tzurim. We were before, we are ahead of them. So you could say that what the Balaturim is saying over here, we are beyond creation. We are outside the laws of creation. We are outside the laws of nature. We have a special connection to Hashem. And this is what it means. Similarly, now the beginning of the Pasuk and the second part of the Pasuk are speaking about the true nature of Yidden. Ki mereish tzurim erenu umegvois asherenu means Jews preceded the world. Like it says, Nimlach b'nish misayim shel tzadikim. In what did Hashem decide and conclude that He wants to make a world? With the Jewish nation, in their essence, as they exist as souls. And so too, as we all know, the first Rashi, Bereishis, B'shvil Yisrael, B'shvil HaTorah. Why did He create the world? For the Torah and for the Jews, means first there's a Jew, and a purpose of what a Jew is all about, and then He creates the world to serve the Jew, so to speak. And this is what the Balaturim is saying over here. It means, Kimereish Tzurim Arenu. We come before the world. And therefore, Hen Levadad Yishkein. And therefore, of course, we're separate from all the other nations. We have a different role, we have a different purpose, we have a special connection. And the words of Chassidus, everything else falls into the category of Elikus, Mahava Nivra, and the Jews are called Elikus, Nasa Nivra, which means all the rest of the world fall into the category of creations. They're a creation, they're an existence. Jews are not Elikus Mahava Nivra, not the way God created a creation, but Elikus Nasa Nivra, it's, so to speak, God in human form. Every Jew has the essence of God DNA in him. So in other words, there's something in each and every single one of us that transcends everything that's related to any limitations, to any rules and regulations and conditions that are connected to nature or to the physical, etc. And that's what it means, Hen Om Levadid Yishkoin, because we're separate, we're beyond, we transcend. And therefore, we don't have to reckon with the threat of the non-Jew. As Mark Twain writes in his article, the Roman is not here anymore, the Greek Empire is not anymore. And the same thing is true with every single empire that tried to destroy the Jew, and the Jew is still standing, and they're all in the dustbin of history, as they say. Because the laws of nature don't apply when it comes to the Jews. Now, what is this? How is this relevant? On so many ways, on so many levels. You know, first of all, there's the idea that you should never be embarrassed. We see this in life, and the Rebbe used to always talk about this. Don't be embarrassed about being a Jew. And there's always going to be people that are looking down on Jews, like Bilam and Balak. And we know the Rebbe says, when you will show your real Jewish pride, that you don't compromise on your Yiddishkeit, on your principles and your values, then you'll ultimately get respect. They respect someone who respects their heritage. You'll get respect when you respect your tradition. And the Rebbe used to always speak about that. So that's number one. Every single person in his own personal life. And then there's when we're talking about Israel. This conversation has been coming up in the last decade so many times. Like when Obama would tell Bibi Netanyahu, you know, Israel is getting isolated. Or it's not sustainable. And therefore you should do this and you should do that. So first of all, the people living in Israel that feel an issue of security every single day, life and death matters. They look at this Obama, who's in America, how many thousand miles away, preaching to us about what's sustainable, what's not sustainable. The Jewish existence was never sustainable. It doesn't follow any rules. It's a miracle. And it's an ongoing miracle every single day. And so too the establishment of Eretz Yisrael. It's a miracle every single day. Utzu eitzav v'sufar dabru davar v'liyakum ki imanu keil. That's the answer. There's people plotting all the time, millions, to wipe us out. But ki imanu keil, we have Hashem with us. Should I explain that to the UN? Should I explain that to Obama? So this is what Bibi Netanyahu knows from Jewish history. And the same thing is, so we're saying we're getting isolated? Maybe that's a good thing. In the Jewish Torah, we speak about the fact that we're isolated. Henam levadat yishkain. Obviously, it's not what they mean by that. But still, we have to know. We're always going to be apart. There's always going to be a reason why someone will find why we should change, etc., etc. So then we have to know, Henam levadat yishkain uvagoyim leyischashav. It's a plus, it's a benefit. We have a connection to infinity. And therefore, uvagoyim leyischashav. Just hold on tight. And then everything will work out, ultimately. And the same thing recently with what happened in Gaza. I don't want to elaborate, but it's the same exact idea. We have many, many Jews who are not so strong in their Jewishness, and they're very scared because of what the newspapers are saying, what people are saying, etc., etc. But the answer is, if they would study Jewish history, they would see it's nothing new. We always knew this, and there's always going to be people that have objections, and they want to make protest, and the double standard, etc., etc. It's an old story. And we have to know there's one response. Hen levodad yishkaim uvagoyim lo yischashav. Don't worry. We have to do the right thing, of course. But we don't have to worry about our survival based on other people's approval. We have a special connection. This is also just to connect it to the Pirkei Avos of this week. It says, Gedola Torah, Perek Vav Mishnah Zayin, Torah is great. Shinesenes Chayim Lo Yiseh. It says it gives life to those who practice it. Ba'ilam Hazeh u'ba'ilam haba. This is Jewish survival. Living Judaism. It's not only enough about learning it privately, behind closed doors, but living it. Be on the subway. Learn Torah on the subway, moving your lips. Don't be embarrassed. Wear your tzitzis. Orisa moisoi. Etc., etc., etc. That's what it means. Noisenes chaim lo yiseh. We have to live Judaism. And then it brings a pasuk. Eitz chaim hi lemachazikim ba. When you hold on tight to it. Machazikim ba means it's inseparable. We look at Torah, we see you. We see you, we see Torah. You make it alive. It's your way of life. When it's in a way of machzikim ba, when you grab onto it and you hold on to it tight, that you're inseparable from the Torah, then it's a true Eitz Chaim, then it's a true source of life. I'd like to finish with two stories, getting back to the Frierdiker Rebbe, about he was an icon of Mesiras Nefesh and speaking, like they say, truth to power. One man against the Soviet regime, a government that was intending to stamp out Judaism, and he ran a complete underground network of shluchim that were running chadarim, teaching children aleph beis, having a mikveh going, etc., etc., etc. So there's two parts of the story that maybe is not so well known. And one, I'm reading from Sefer HaSichos Tafesh Pei Zayin, page 171. And he writes as follows. He said as follows. Kishe Yisi Sham, when I was there, and he means when he was like in prison, I didn't have a sefer. And the first sefer they brought me was a Tanakh Shmuel. And when I opened it up to the pasuk, Loiseitze oidi tonu l'melchama v'loisichbe esner Yisrael, that they will not go out to war anymore, and they will not be able to extinguish the Jewish flame. When I saw that verse, it just opened up to that pasuk. So machti simcha gdeila, that brought me great joy. And I made a note of it. So in other words, this is exactly what we're talking about. The other nation, the enemy of the Jew, Yisrael, will never be able to extinguish the Jewish flame. And here's the Frierdiker Rebbe, in the most horrid, horrible, terrible, dangerous situation, where a life meant nothing to these tyrants and dictators and to that regime. Stalin killed millions of his own people, etc. And yet the Frierdiker Rebbe opens up a Shmuel and he sees this pasuk that they will not be able to extinguish the Jewish flame. And the answer is, as we spoke until now, because we have a special connection. And then I'll tell you another story which I find tremendously inspiring. I don't know if this happened in the story of 1927, but he was arrested many times, and one of the times he writes that he was brought to the headquarters of the NKVD, the secret police, and he was walking and he was being escorted with a whole, like a mini a troop, like 10, 12 soldiers, and they were all armed. And he describes with swords, and he's walking like a middle. There's a couple in front of him, a couple in back, and then they have the commanding officer. And the officer says to the Frierdiker Rebbe, he's walking with his hat, and his tzitzis were sticking out. So the commanding officer says, take off your hat and make your garment in such a way that we shouldn't be able to see your tzitzis. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says, no, I'm not taking off my hat. And then the commanding officer says, I command you to take off your hat. And if not, you'll have a bitter end. And the Frierdiker Rebbe answers, I will not take off my hat. And I'd like to know, do you know who I am? He asked the commanding officer. So the commanding officer says, who? And he says, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And so, the commanding officer says, and then the Frierdiker Rebbe said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe does not fear anything and does not tremble from any threats. And then he continues that after that, he was able to keep his hat on. So this is like, wow, look at the Frierdiker Rebbe's words. So to say that every single one of us in similar circumstances would behave the same way, I cannot say. But as the Rebbe said many times, the lesson we take from Beis Tammuz is to learn and see that even one man who faces up to a superpower, as it was called, but nevertheless, if he goes with koyach ha'torah v'mitzvos, he will win ultimately. But more than that, that since we live in free countries and we're able to practice Yiddishkeit freely, so let us all take advantage of that. Practice, live Yiddishkeit freely, try to influence others, raise Jewish consciousness and awareness and experience as much as possible. And if we have to have Mesiras Nefesh, our Mesiras Nefesh means to run to shul 5 minutes earlier. Our Mesiras Nefesh means when there's a shir in public, you might think you'd rather learn alone, join the shir. And so on and so forth. Our Mesiras Nefesh means if there's some sort of gossip, some really juicy gossip that you would like to tell about somebody else, don't say the gossip. So our Mesiras Nefesh is about self-restraint, self-control, self-discipline, and going a bit the extra mile, and going out of our comfort zone. Hashem should help that we should get the strength from the Chag HaGeula of the Frierdiker Rebbe to practice Geula on a personal level, personal levels of liberation and striving for excellence in our day-to-day life. And our personal Geula will bring about the general Geula, the Geula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarich, your man in Melbourne.